ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music, and more.
Hi, Jules and Jez here, and every week on Not Stupid, we unpack the news of the week.
From the stuff that matters to the stories you're obsessed with.
And there's a heck of a lot of women in the Liberal Party who won't say publicly that they support it. Or when they leave, they say we should think about it.
Oh, politicians say all sorts of things when they leave.
You can find Not Stupid on the ABC Listen app.
It's an almighty fight. In one corner is Donald Trump, and the other, Harvard, one of the oldest institutions in America. The US president wants to defund the university, but Harvard's retaliating, making it the first institution in the US to take Trump on. Today, Geoff Kabaservice from the centre-right think tank, the Niskanen Center, on why Trump's after Harvard and whether Americans will stand for it. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal Land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily.
America's richest and oldest university is in a standoff with the most powerful man in the world.
I think Harvard's a disgrace. I think what they did was a disgrace. They're obviously anti-Semitic.
The White House is demanding Harvard make changes to hiring, admissions and teaching practices to fight anti-Semitism on campus.
But the university is refusing the orders, and some of its law professors are now suing the federal government, arguing its demands breach free speech and are unconstitutional.
He wants to see what we're teaching, and he wants to change what we're teaching. He wants to see what we're researching, and he wants to make sure we're only asking the questions that he wants asked and giving the answers that he wants to be giving. That is not about anti-Semitism. That's about authoritarianism.
Geoff, Harvard, it's the oldest and wealthiest university in America. Just explain the institution for me.
Well, thanks for asking me about this subject, Sam, because it's been of interest to me since I actually wrote about the history of elite universities in my PhD dissertation.
Oh, gosh.
25 years ago. And although I got my undergraduate and graduate degrees from Harvard's main rival, Yale University, I also studied at Harvard.
Great.
So Harvard, let's talk about Harvard. As you say, it is America's oldest university, founded in 1636, so it's older than the United States itself by, I guess, 140 years. And it's the richest university not just in the United States, but in the world. It has an endowment of around $53 billion US, which is more than the GDP of, I think, at least half of the countries in the world.
Wow.
And by most of the rankings of academic quality, it's either the best or at least among the very best in the world. Its scholars have been at the forefront of certainly of many of the key developments in science and technology that have undergirded American prosperity. But more than that, I would say that Harvard scholars have been at the forefront of many of the most important achievements in human civilization across the past century.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. I'm glad you've got a very close connection to it as well. But let's just unpack then why Donald Trump is after it, if you like, and why it's decided to fight back. Now, I guess as someone who comes from the centre-right on the political spectrum, you do have a particular perspective on this, don't you? You have a view that universities need reforming.
I do believe that. And, you could say that since I am on the centre-right, that, conservatives have been critical of what they see as left-wing dominance in higher education, at least since 1951, when Bill Buckley rose to prominence with his book God and Man at Yale, which attacked what he saw as rampant secularism and socialism on college campuses. You don't necessarily have to believe me when I say that Harvard has canted too far to the ideological left. Even Harvard's president, Alan Garber, agrees that Harvard has gone too far to the left.
And I think there are certain fields where people with more liberal or left-wing points of view feel more welcome. It may be that we don't have as many conservatives as we should have. Part of it also may be that people don't feel comfortable speaking out.
And really, this has damaged their quality and public reputation. Harvard was dead last in both the 2023 and 2024 rankings of free speech on campus. There are essentially no conservatives on Harvard's faculty. Harvard really has devalued intellectual and ideological diversity, and that has led to groupthink.
Well, that is also, of course, debatable. And I guess one argument against what you're just saying is that progressive ideas make society better. I mean, there'd be academics at Harvard that completely defend the direction of the university, of course.
Yes, but I think the progressives who do believe in liberal values would actually say that if you never get your views challenged, then you're not actually getting the best information. So, there really is a need for greater ideological diversity on campus, and it is perhaps arguable to what extent some of the recent protest against Israel's actions in Gaza is legitimate protest versus crossing the line into anti-Semitism. But like I said, even Harvard's president, Alan Garber, believes that that line has been crossed, and he himself, as a Jewish person, has been subject to anti-Semitism on campus. Yeah. So I think we are talking about a real problem here.
Well, let's just step back to April 2024. That, of course, is when these mass protests began on campuses across the United States, even here in Australia.
Officers in riot gear break up a pro-Palestinian rally at the University of Texas.
Tensions ran high in Melbourne as protests unfold across the country, inspired by the movement in the US.
The pro-Palestinian protest movement was really large, and that was also happening at Harvard, wasn't it?
Well, I would rewind, because Harvard really hit the national headlines earlier than that. Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023, and the very next day, 33 Harvard student organizations came out with a statement holding Israel entirely responsible for the violence. And it was in December of that year that Harvard's then president, Claudine Gay, was asked in a congressional hearing whether calls for the genocide of Jews would violate the university's rules against bullying and harassment.
Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
And she responded legalistically that would depend upon the context.
It can be, depending on the context.
But then, as you say, came the wave of pro-Palestinian demonstrations, not just at Harvard, but across elite universities around the country, and very little of that was met with any real disciplinary action. And this became an issue that Republicans turned to their advantage in the fall 2024 elections, and which set the stage for Trump's attacks as president on Harvard and other elite universities.
But while some people did see those protests as anti-Semitic, the protesters, on the other hand, say they were just advocating for Palestinian rights. All of this, of course, all these protests, they're unfolding at a time when Donald Trump wasn't president, but then he is elected, and on one of the first days of his presidency, he signs this executive order calling for more to be done on anti-Semitism, and then he starts to cut off funding to Harvard. So just tell me what he's done.
Right. Trump, I believe, issued 2 executive orders. The first, as you say, on maybe the first day of his presidency. The second, better known one, in January. And it said that the Department of Justice would take immediate action to protect law and order, to quell pro-Hamas vandalism and intimidation, and punish what he called anti-Jewish racism in leftist, anti-American colleges and universities. I do remember that phrase, and I think that's significant because Trump is not somebody for whom combating anti-Semitism has been a major theme in his life. On the other hand, like many people on the right, he has seen universities as the enemy. J.D. Vance, the vice president, gave a famous speech in which he said the universities are the enemies, the professors are the enemies.
Because I think if any of us want to do the things that we want to do for our country and for the people who live in it, we have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country.
So it was pretty clear that Trump was going to do something against Harvard and other universities, but I think people were still surprised at the extent to which he acted against Harvard.
Right, and then last month, in April, demands start coming in from the attorneys at the Department of Health and the Department of Education. What do they want from Harvard?
So that letter to Harvard President Alan Garber essentially threatened to cut off of federal funding if Harvard didn't discontinue its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, overhaul its disciplinary structure, and then allow the government to conduct audits into the viewpoints of students, faculty, and staff, which in effect would have given government power over faculty and student hiring, university governance, even the curriculum. And now, just to bring this up to the present day, Secretary of Education Linda McMahon has said that the federal government will no longer award grants to Harvard.
Linda, stand up, Linda. You are doing so good. Education. We're bringing education back to the states. She's very upset with Harvard. They have $53 billion in a fund, and yet they want more grants.
And the Trump administration has already cut off more than $2 billion in funding. But Harvard, Geoff, really isn't having any of it. In fact, it's become one of the first institutions in America to really push back against Trump.
So you're right. When Harvard President Garber received that message from the Trump administration lawyers, he basically told them to go pound sand. I think he phrased it more eloquently than that. He said that no government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they admit, whom they hire, which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue.
Harvard President Alan Garber has issued a public letter hitting out at the government. He says the administration's prescription goes beyond the power of the federal government. It threatens our values as a private institution devoted to the pursuit, production and dissemination of knowledge.
And so, as you said, in retribution, the Trump administration almost immediately froze $2.2 billion in federal funding to Harvard.
The president has made it quite clear that it's Harvard who has put themselves in the position to lose their own funding by not obeying federal law. And we expect all colleges and universities who are receiving taxpayer funds to abide by federal law. It's quite simple.
All right, so Harvard then decides to go to court. So it's suing the Trump administration and calling threats to its federal funding a violation of the First Amendment.
They are violations of the First Amendment of the Constitution and its protections of free speech against government interference. And I believe Harvard's lawsuit also claims that the government is violating laws that govern the suspension or withdrawal of research funding. And, the Trump administration's response is of a piece with its general disregard for laws, constitution, and precedents generally. One hates to give the Trump administration credit for anything, but I do believe that the negative public reaction against Harvard and other universities that followed October 7th has had some impact in putting them back toward the center and, frankly, restoring their emphasis on the most important purposes of the university. At the same time, one has to say that what the Trump administration is doing is absolutely abysmal and, goes well beyond, really, the most drastic curtailments of free speech at the universities that we've experienced so far.
All right, well, Geoff, what do you think, though? Can Harvard actually win this fight against the US government, against Donald Trump?
I believe that Harvard will survive, although it could be significantly damaged and diminished. I also believe that the Trump administration has overstepped, and overstepping is what this administration does best, right? Would Anthony Albanese and Labour have won such a victory if Australians hadn't reacted against Trump as they did? It's sort of a repeat of what we saw in Canada, right? Where Trump single-handedly revived the Liberal Party after they were down 30 points to the Conservatives. So the Trump effect is real. People may be starting to feel warmer about Harvard, given how much Trump is attacking it. And I think even some conservatives are going to have second thoughts, depending on how far the administration goes. To go back to what I told you at the beginning of our conversation, American research universities really have been the global engine for scientific discovery, at least since World War II. And Harvard is arguably the crown jewel in that system. Does it need reform? Absolutely. But why would you destroy that? It would be like dropping a nuclear bomb on the Great Barrier Reef. Why would you destroy the crown jewel in our scientific system? It's unilateral disarmament. It's the kind of thing that would be imposed upon a defeated nation in war. So I think you're going to see some serious public turnaround in their opinion of the Trump administration's actions against Harvard and other universities. But public opinion is not necessarily deterrent to Trump doing what he wants to do.
Geoff Kabaservice is a political scientist from the centre-right think tank, the Niskanen Center. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Sam Dunn. Audio production by Adair Shepherd. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.